Hello, system thinkers. I'm your host, Ben Callahan, founder of Sparkbox and Redwood's design system community. I want to welcome you to episode 070 of The Question, where my co-host Hannah Clarke and I facilitate a deep dive on the topic of lasting design systems infrastructure. If you have a moment, please get subscribed to the show out at bencallahan.com/thequestion. This episode is made possible by Mintlify. If your design system documentation lives in 5 places and satisfies no one, Mintlify can provide one beautiful, AI-powered home for everything your team builds and the why behind those decisions. Try it free at bit.ly/try-Mintlify and use the code MINT-THEQ for 50% off their pro plan for 6 months. Thanks for being here. Let's get into it. Hannah, are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself and sort of how you got into the system space.
So I am a UI engineer at a company called Intapp. I've been working there for the past, nearly 2 years now, which is my first dedicated role in design systems. Before that, I was in a team that was sort of taking on design system as a responsibility, but it wasn't necessarily our main focus. Originally I was sort of working in full stack and kind of gravitated towards front end, made a lot of friends with designers and kind of got into the space kind of organically, I suppose, just by learning more about front end and talking to the right people and working in places where there was kind of an idea of a design system, but then it was always kind of relying on goodwill rather than having dedicated people who were it was their primary focus. So yeah, I kind of got to the point where I really wanted to be doing that as my main role, which is where I've been for nearly the past 2 years now. And before that, I didn't work in software at all. I worked at a university doing widening access projects. I've got quite a mixed background in terms of experience, but this is what I love these days. So very happy to be just working design system stuff day to day.
Yeah, awesome. And welcome. Thank you for it takes a lot of time from our co-hosts to do this, y'all. Just so you know, like we have to meet the week before and we develop a topic and questions, and they're helping me edit all of that context down. And so I really just want to make sure we say thanks to those folks who do this. And Hannah, I appreciate your time over the last week. And I know that even today we've got lots left to do. So my name is Ben. I'm your host for today. And I just want to say thanks for being here. I'm one of the founders of a company called Sparkbox. We're a digital design and development studio, and we do a lot of large-scale systems work. I also founded a community called Redwoods. A lot of the folks here are a part of that community. I've got a book coming out later this year with Smashing, and I do a lot of other stuff, coaching and speaking and that sort of thing. So would love to connect with you. I'm sure that Hannah would as well. So you can get both of our LinkedIns here. Please make sure you reach out and connect if you haven't yet. We want to stay connected to folks in the community. So this week, we asked you 4 questions. The first was, which of these statements best describes your company? Is it led by engineering, led by product, led by design, or led by a balance of those 3? And then we gave you the option to give us another scenario if that's the case for you. And then we asked, on your design system team, which roles have at least one dedicated person? DevOps, design ops, UI design, front-end dev, or NA? And then we asked, who has responsibility over the delivery of your coded components, and gave you just an open text to answer. And then we asked, what do you believe are the most important actions a design system team can take to create a system that lasts? And again, that was an open text answer. We sent this out to 1,061 design system practitioners. We got 45 responses. And as always, you can click this link to see the raw data for yourself. Please take a look at that. There's so many great answers, as always. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about these first 2 questions that were a little bit more quantitative in nature. I put in the notes next to both of these, I just put this idea that these were not the answers I was expecting. I think a lot of times we kind of come to these thinking, yeah, we're going to kind of see that bell curve, or whatever. This was different for me. I think I was expecting a lot more organizations that are led by engineering. And we saw a huge amount, almost it was like 40%, I think. Yeah, 40% by product. So, Hannah, I don't know, what were you expecting here?
I don't think I was probably as surprised as you were about that. I think a lot of companies tend to they like to think, or they like to say that they're led by engineering, but realistically, engineering teams are often pointed in the direction of what product wants next. I've definitely worked in teams before where, as a group of engineers, we've been going down one avenue trying to build something that we think is going to fix some problems for users, when product turn around and say, well, actually, no, we want to pivot onto this completely different thing, so just abandon everything that you've done. So I don't think it's too surprising. I think there's often kind of a lot of input, whether that's research led or not, or it's just kind of on the whim of someone who says, we think this thing would be cool, let's add that in. I don't know. I think obviously the best thing is to have a balance, and it's good to see that was quite high as a response.
Yeah.
I think you can't really make the right decisions if you're not having conversations across the board.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's interesting. A lot of the consulting work that I do, it's usually an organization that's led by engineering. That's what I tend to find, and perhaps those are the organizations that hire consultants like me. So maybe that makes sense.
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Awesome. So thanks for answering that one, folks. The second more quantitative question was around the roles that you have, dedicated, and we weren't asking about all the possible roles, but ones that we thought might have more of a say in, delivering components in the way that we've asked about. So, of course, a significant number of folks with this super high front end dev like that, I think, was surprised us both. I think, Hannah, do you agree?
Yeah, I was very surprised. I mean, particularly that's higher than UI design. Like that really surprised me. I would have definitely thought it was more likely that you would have designers than front end developers.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of Sean, I know I see you there. Can you drop a link to that post you wrote recently about how there's too many designers? I think is maybe what you said. What was that?
Yes. Is there too much design in design systems?
That's right.
We just had a trend that I'd spotted in open roles that were being advertised. They tend to always lean more towards design, and there didn't seem to be as many sort of engineering focused roles. So I just did a little bit of research on that, and then put some hypotheses of why that would be. I'll dig out a link now.
That would be great. And I know others in Redwoods had some different thoughts on that too. So Guy, I don't know if you wrote a post in response to that or not, but if you did, please drop it. Would love to see that. Awesome. So other thoughts, there were lots of answers in the other section for both of these. So I tried to kind of summarize those for us here. A lot of folks, I think there's a handful of people who are, commonly answering the question, who have, they're on smaller teams, nobody's dedicated, things like that. And so we're seeing a lot of those in the answers as well. So appreciate everybody here coming and supporting the question in this way. Where do you want to go from here, Hannah? We've got a lot of data we gathered. There's lots of interesting things. Just before the call, you mentioned this idea of community that you had seen here. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that came up, I think particularly with looking at teams that don't necessarily have dedicated people in them, and then different configurations, whether you've got developers or you've got designers or you don't have anyone. I think it's great talking about things like tooling and infrastructure and how you build all of that, but like ultimately, if people don't know what it is you're doing, don't understand what the design system is, you're not having those conversations, then there's kind of no point to any of those configurations, really. So like trying to, how do you kind of build the infrastructure for that aspect of it, I suppose, which was a conversation that we were having in our retro just before this call, was about like, how do we build awareness in a way that isn't necessarily just sort of, sitting everybody down in front of a PowerPoint and saying, this is the design system, this is what it will deliver. Like, how do you actually engage people in that so that they actually truly understand it, and they then support it and root for it and want to be part of the community around it? Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting thing that came out of those answers.
Yeah. Well, what did you, in your retro or whatever conversation you were just having, did you solve this problem, or like what have you landed on to help with that?
We definitely didn't solve the problem. We came up with some really interesting ideas. Like a few of them were sort of one that I thought was really good was someone had suggested doing a showcase, not from necessarily people in the design system team, but other designers and engineers who have been using the design system, and them showcasing what they've been able to build as a result of having that resource, which I thought was really cool, because then it stops being about us just saying, look at this thing that we've done, and trying to sort of thrust it on people whether they're interested or not. And it actually says, look, this is tangible. This is what someone's done as a result of having these resources available. So I thought that was a really kind of cool one.
Yeah, that's great. This is the point of the conversation, folks, where you can jump right in. So raise your hand in Zoom, turn that camera on, say hello. We'll call on you and get you up into the conversation. Oh, amazing. Joshua, what's up?
That just made me, I mentioned some things that we tried on the last one I was on. We had if you have in person, we have like a lab, and it's actually combining what you just said, Hannah. So a team that actually did something really nice with our new kind of composable design system. And then you actually did a lab where the people come in person with their laptops and rebuild what the people did that was kind of innovative with our design system. But then they could also do a little lab thing where they build something new. And I guess I think the thing we kind of learned from that is like any opportunities where people could not be like just doing work and doing something fun and like chatting and hanging out, but getting paid at work, like it makes them a bit think the design system is like a funner part of their day job,
Yeah. I love that sort of carrot instead of stick approach to this.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, let's get into some of the more technical side too. Hannah, tell us a little bit about how you are delivering components to your consuming teams.
Yeah, I guess we kind of started in quite a good position when the team was formed, in the we kind of had the basics in terms of the coded side of things, but that had been managed by a product team. So when I was hired and one of my colleagues was hired, we kind of could do what we wanted on the code side, which gave us a lot of freedom. So Amy kind of tasked me with doing some research into how we could provide for our teams and not necessarily be stuck with just like one framework like React. So we got looking into web components. So now we basically write all of our components as Stencil web components. We write them once, and then using that, we then output them to different NPM packages. So our teams can kind of use whichever ones they need. So we have an NPM package for our tokens, one for our styles, and then we have our component ones as well. So we have like our web components package, which is now being used by our Angular developers, which is really cool. They can just like build a really simple wrapper and just throw those into their application, which is great. We have a React package for React 18. And we've recently just added one for React 19 and SSR support as well. So because we're such a small team as well, it means that we don't have to keep writing all of these components over and over again in different frameworks. Don't have to keep maintaining them and having them always be out of sync. So yeah, we wanted to be able to make sure we could provide the resources our teams needed, while also accepting the fact that as 3 UI engineers, we couldn't possibly write everything in every framework. So we wanted to kind of make our lives easy at the same time as being able to still provide things. So that's kind of where we're at the moment.
Yeah, amazing. Let's hear, folks, how you all are handling this. And I actually want to move this little sticky note because we had 3 other statements that I identified. I'm sure there were probably others that I missed in the data that talked about this idea of when, in response to that 4th question, which was about what are you doing to create sort of a more sustainable and long-lasting approach, teams said things like, we're trying to make the design system framework agnostic, so it can survive those kinds of changes in the product layer. So there were three folks that I saw immediately that talked about that: Francie and Guy and Amy, who I think is your teammate, Hannah. So would love to hear that. Like, what are you doing to, in those other teams? What are you doing? The idea of a tool like Stencil that sort of wraps, web components and allows you to use those in lots of frameworks is a great solution. But would love to hear how others are tackling that. And then also, we didn't really get into this in this question, but I just was thinking about this idea of, like, I hear dev teams talking about this a lot, the idea of creating framework agnostic versions of components for engineers. But is that a thing we could be doing for design too? Like, there are many different tools that you could be using for design. Could we possibly do the same over there? So any thoughts that folks have on this, jump right in, raise your hand. We'll get you into the combo. Don't be shy, folks.
I'm really interested to know what people think about the design agnostic tools as well. Like, that's fascinating to me. It feels like everybody's kind of beholden to Figma in a lot of ways, and there's got to be other options, surely.
Yeah, and we've had a few folks from Penpot on the show as well, and that's an interesting tool, open source, that lets you do a lot of very similar things with kind of a different mindset. The approach to the product is a little different. It's open source and it's very just like a different set of values, I think. So I think that's one. I also have thought about that in terms of, like, more clearly sort of defining your components as data so that you can move them around between things, right? So that's sort of this abstraction of components out of tooling in design or tooling in frameworks, like in JavaScript frameworks or whatever. But I think we're early days on that. Just to be honest, those formats are still being developed. So, all right, we got some folks lining up. I love it. Joshua, jump in.
Just a quick, because I remember, so ours went from, like, web components that they had to get React, so they wrapped them in React, but that was causing problems for consuming teams. And then they just went all in on React. And I for me, my instinct was kind of more like what Hannah said, of trying to do something vanilla at the base that you could kind of transfer into different things, but instead they didn't build them in web components. And can someone explain to me, like, what are the, like, why you would or would not do that?
Hannah, you want to take that one?
Why you would or wouldn't build them as web components?
Yeah, because I couldn't I was trying to understand, why would they not do that and then have a React version, I guess.
Yeah, it's not as it's easy for me to say we write web components and we output them as React, because it's not entirely true. So they are wrapped to make them React compatible, and that can cause problems. We ran into a lot of teething issues when we started that, because there were certain things that our teams wanted from their React components that we weren't just getting out of the box using something like Stencil. You can run into issues with things like web components use the shadow DOM, which can make it tricky to do various things when you're just using React components. So there's we had to make a lot of tweaks to what we were outputting to make it what was needed by our React teams. And quite often it can kind of come down to dealing with what React teams are comfortable with rather than what's actually useful. A lot of the problems that we had initially were just teams who were really unwilling to deal with anything that wasn't pure React as it was written originally. And that was more of like I guess it was more of a sort of a React developer culture thing rather than actual technical implementation. Like, they were just sort of very clear that they only wanted their components as React. And so that was more of kind of like an education and mind-changing piece of work to do than it was actually doing things to adjust the technical implementation. But yeah, it can take time. Like, we ended up having so Stencil will have it has its own kind of React output function in it where you can run this script that's built in and it will just put these components out. But we have some additional scripting on top of that to process those. So I think a lot of it comes down to, like, getting those requirements from teams who want the React components from the outset, so you know exactly what they want the components to look like, we added in things to generate a separate types file, for example, because they wanted that, which is, perfectly reasonable. But making sure that you know what those requirements are and then seeing if you can meet them, but not just assuming that straight out of the box, a web component converted with a React wrapper will do everything, because it won't necessarily.
I heard that. Okay, that makes sense, because I think there probably was not that much asking what's needed. And then when we actually released the pure React ones, explaining to people the difference between React Wrap and pure, if they're non-tech people, was very hard. They're like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah. I've had a lot of those conversations over the past couple of years. I think, I don't know. I used to be a React developer, so I find it very easy to be mean to React developers, but I think a lot of it is just familiarity and loyalty to what you know and not wanting to necessarily do anything different.
Yeah. Hannah, can you tell us a little bit more about the additional scripting on top of what Stencil does to generate those React components?
Yeah. So we were doing things like we would write our web components with like default prop values, for example, and while they would work perfectly fine in web components, and you would get like auto completion if you were just using a web component in your IDE, you wouldn't get that. It wasn't being passed through to React. So part of that script is basically it pulls out where we've written a comment saying this is what the default value is. The script runs, it pulls those out, it puts it into the types file. So then if there isn't a value provided for a prop that should have a default, it will fall back to that instead. So just like those kind of little quality of life things where, you would expect if you were using a component and you didn't include something that was a required prop, you would get like a red squiggly line saying this is required. We kind of had to add some of those in with the type stuff to make sure that was coming through. And those default values as well. So like there's a few different things like that we did just to kind of make sure that the developers were getting the experience that they had expected and come to be, happy with when they were using our components as well as their own.
Yeah, I love that. That sort of, you're caring about the developer experience in that case, right? More than just giving them something they can work with, you're giving them something that is actually a joy to work with, maybe,
Yeah, and I think as well, like, part of the thing that we're very aware of is the fact that while we might ultimately be saying, we're going to make things easier for you, we're providing you with these resources, what you're actually doing at the beginning is making more work for teams that already have enough to do, because you're saying replace your existing stuff with what we've built. And so you have to really lower that barrier to entry to even convince them to think about doing it. Otherwise, they're just not going to bother if it's too much like hard work.
Yeah. All right, let's get some other folks in. Guy, jump in, buddy.
Hey, excuse me. Can I talk design and Figma and tools?
Please.
Awesome. Which, again, not my favorite topic, but so I work at a large enterprise company, and definitely, so we have a huge product engineering organization, and but still a lot of silos within that. So there's a bit of a Wild West feeling where not everyone is doing exactly the same thing. A lot of teams are testing different rapid prototyping tools and those kind of things. And designers are doing that as well, which is quite exciting because designers are getting more excited about building prototypes as the first thing they do, or in working with engineers and with accessibility specialists and content, and really trying to understand that together, which to me is a huge improvement over building static pages in Figma and showing it to people and trying to get them to understand what you have in your head. Where we're sort of focusing our design system efforts right now, and some of you know, we won a Zero Height award for innovation last year for building an AI workflow from Figma designs to production level code, like actual production level code. We're working on augmenting some of the other workflows that are happening right now. So after you have a prototype, designers need to take it back into a design tool, which is, we use Figma, and make sure that edge cases are accounted for, and add accessibility annotations and all the things that need to happen to have a full, like, ready for dev package. And we're really working on a new version of our AI workflow where it takes a rapid prototype and turns it using TJ's Figma Console MCP into a design that is using our design system library in Figma. So we're really using these tools that help people move faster in doing these like things of like, oh, I just need to take this and recreate it in Figma. And as a Trojan horse, we're making sure that they're using the design system along the way, which has been quite successful so far. So I don't know if that is really a design agnostic or a design tool agnostic thing, because we are working on something that technically can take any sort of input and spit out code and not just Figma. But yeah, I think there's a big push into not necessarily, or I sense that there's a big push, not necessarily change Figma to a different design tool, but circumvent design tools altogether.
Yeah. I mean, I hear you saying, Guy, that by having translation available between frameworks and tools, we do sort of alleviate the need for any specific one. Is that kind of a way to summarize it? Like your approach?
Yeah, we're trying to be like the tool that spits out code. Yes, it started with here's a frame in Figma, create code out of it using our design system. But we also used it to take a legacy design system that we had and upgrade it to the new design system. Or we're looking into how do we take any sort of input to have that same output.
Yeah, I love that. My business partner and I were just talking about this idea of, in a world where you can translate these things easily between the various places where they live, do we need sort of a single source of truth, or do we just need these things to exist somewhere? You know, so I don't know. This is a strange world that we're rapidly falling into here. Kelly, what's on your mind?
Almost forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, so I am also coming from a pretty large enterprise environment. So for like the last 8 years or so across 2 companies, I've been on a dedicated design system team and like a team of 2 to 3 people max. So like pretty small, little tight dedicated teams. And actually a month ago, the company that I've been at for the last 2 years decided to lay off their entire product design org, engineers, designers, product managers, everybody, just cut the entire thing. So that's a fun new world that we're in. So I have the unfortunate insight right now of seeing a whole lot of job postings in this world and seeing sort of what companies are claiming to want and look for and ask for. And I was thinking about earlier the idea of like, is there too much design in design systems? And like something interesting that I'm seeing just, anecdotally from looking at postings online in different companies and people posting about what their companies are doing is I really am getting this sense of like pitting design and engineering against each other in this conversation rather than sort of celebrating the idea that both sides bring a whole lot to the conversation and that both sides are important. And obviously, like I'm coming from the design side, so like I have my own bias about like the importance of design and the importance of whiteboarding and research and mock-ups and all the doodling and brainstorming part of design and like the value that I personally think exists in that. But it's really interesting to see a lot of companies doing this tug of war between we want a really design first person who also magically is a code wizard, or we want like the world's best developer who also magically is a design expert. And I think expecting one person to be all of that is kind of silly and unfair. And probably is going to get you somebody who's like, really good at one thing and like not bad at another thing, but like it's not their strongest suit. And I think cutting out the idea that like I think if you ask any designer who's been in this field a long time, we will talk endlessly about how we feel like we are constantly trying to justify our value to a lot of companies and like what the value of design is, because it's not always as tangible. And there's a, it's a factual statement that like without engineers, the thing doesn't exist in the world. I've made a pretty picture of it, which is cool, but like you need someone who codes to make it usable. So I don't know. I think it's an interesting time to be sitting in this space and to be like still trying to advocate that like both sides of the equation bring so much value. And the team that I just left was as a dedicated team myself and one front end engineer. And I felt like it was some of the coolest work I'd ever done, like working so closely and so tightly with someone where every component we worked on had a really strong design representation, but also a really strong engineering representation. And to be able to like everything that went out the door felt very balanced between the two sides. So yeah, I don't even know if I have a point, but I just think it's an interesting, for me anyway, observation of the current market and expectations.
Yeah. Wow. What a rough season to be in. And then you add in the layers of like AI can do all these things too. And it's just like, we don't need these people. But to have that experience, Kelly, where you're so tightly integrated with the other discipline, it's like it makes it hard to go any other way, like it's almost like you're spoiled, in that sort of working environment.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we can support you as you look for something new, Kelly. Let us know if we can help. Hannah, any thoughts on this? Is this kind of resonating with you?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think this does feel like kind of a new space that we're in, but it's something that we've seen a lot in software, in that the whole notion of a full stack developer and whether that's what companies want or not kind of goes in cycles. Like you get companies that suddenly that see the value of having back enders and front enders and the fact that those skills are very niche and having people who are experts in that specific area is useful. And then it kind of gets to a point where companies are like, well, actually, we need to save money. Let's just get full stack developers in. And generally speaking, coming from a full stack background, full stack means back end. And yeah, sure, I can do front end because that's easy, right? And then, at some point, you get that kind of switch again where it's like, well, actually, we're really good at the back end stuff, but our front end isn't great. Maybe we should hire front enders in again. So this notion of suddenly thinking that everybody can do everything, it kind of goes in circles quite often. And hopefully that's going to be the case here, in that people will realize you can't get someone who does everything really well. Like it's just too much to ask.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This comes up in every consulting gig. It's just like every company has hundreds of full stack devs and nobody that can actually write front end code. So it's like wild. Greg, jump in, buddy. What's up?
Yeah. So I have so many thoughts right now. So I think the foremost one that I wanted to kind of sort of jump into after what Keely just said is actually kind of flipping like the desire to fill these roles with unicorns, essentially, and kind of flip it back in reverse. How many, like, of course, unicorns do not exist, but if they did, how many of those quote unquote unicorns want to do all the things that is expected of them as a unicorn, right? Because if unicorns existed, I would be on the spectrum, because I'm a designer and I want to stick in the design side, but I know enough code to do CSS, some JavaScript. Like I can read some code, and I could, if I have access to code, I could make changes. I want to stick to places where I have higher confidence, but I could do some damage, or I could do some good. But I don't want to be code all the time or majority of the time. I want to use my understanding of code to do the design job better, which in the age of AI is, I think, something everybody should be aspiring to some degree. Like if you're going to use AI for coding purposes, you're going to vibe code or something, you should be trying to learn enough about some of how it works so that you can do it better. You can prompt better. You can use the right terms better. You can understand how things fit together better so that when you're trying to do something, you get it. And then you can do more. I'm not going to say good or bad, but you can do more.
Yeah.
Of course, the whole problem with the unicorn thing is that you're expected to be an expert in all these different things. And I think we're actually seeing that with AI. The big danger is the high confidence that the AI is being the expert for you in a certain area, but to use AI responsibly, you have to be either the expert that can discern that the AI did a good job, or you need to be able to go know to consult with an expert that can discern that.
Yeah.
So, hopefully AI helps us improve and augment and amplify what we're capable of doing. But yeah, it's not going to like turn everyone into a unicorn.
Yeah.
Which, I actually, there's been some talk, and you guys could probably relate to this, is like the idea that designers, developers, product people are all going to become builders. And then you might have smaller teams with less specialization, because that just sounds like you got a bunch of unicorns working on a super team.
Yeah.
But it scares me, because I'm like, wait, no. Now you're expecting a single person to learn all this new stuff that there's a reason why we don't all know all this stuff.
Mhm.
It's really hard, and we don't all want to do it, right? So
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate all that, Greg. I think I see a lot of nodding heads here, so a lot of folks are feeling it. Amy, get into the conversation. What's up?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, like we're starting to see on some of our product teams, especially ones that are moving really fast, is that the workflow is where some designers are working directly in the code base. They may kind of sketch out ideas real quick in Figma just to get it out. But then they're, opening a branch on a repo and they're kind of vibe coding sort of assembly line, right? They're getting the visuals down, and then another engineer will kind of come in behind and actually, sort of make it work. And so some of the things that are on my mind is like how can design systems kind of help in that process, right? Like help designers be more effective with their vibe coding and also to reduce some of the chaos that might create. Creating tools to sort of make sure that they stick to the design system, that they have all the context that they need, and so forth.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like there's so many different ways that I could see something like that playing out. Some engineers are going to be like, oh, great, thanks, you're giving me a starting point to work with. And some are going to be like, heck no, I write my own code, So it's almost like it's more cultural and individual maybe than organizational, I want to bring, so Joanna, I know you're on this call because I think I saw you show up, and I don't want to call you out, but I did see this message that you said that you've built 2 frameworks as opposed to a single framework-agnostic approach. If you're willing to share a little bit more, I would love to hear the reasoning for that. But are there others on the call who have taken this approach too, right? Where, hey, we think of our systems as sort of like this a component is a thing that sort of exists, and then we build multiple instances of that across different types of engineering frameworks or platforms. Anybody have thoughts on this approach, as opposed to using something like what Hannah described earlier, where we build it as a web component using Stencil, wrap it, and release it for different frameworks? Anybody have thoughts on that? Oh, she's here. Thank you for jumping in.
Yeah, I would say we first built our design system in React and didn't have intentions to do another framework, but we had a couple high priority teams come and say, we're only going to use the design system if you can build it in Angular. And so then we had to build like a whole copy of the design system in Angular. Do not recommend. But I do think that the engineers said, both at the inception when we were starting in React and with Angular, there's these like native features of those frameworks that you can't get through something like web components. And so it would be not useful to us if you built it kind of agnostically. But that said, there's like a different design system at our company for a different business unit where they've taken the web component approach. So we're kind of seeing how that all plays out.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks for sharing, Joanna. Sean?
I got some experience in building, multiple implementations, but not across web, but across like native platforms as well. So the design system started off as a React library, and then we kind of moved into the mobile space as well, building out a native iOS and Android implementation. Obviously not all things make sense. There was things in the web design system that just didn't make sense or need implementing in mobile. But when it came to implementing things in mobile, which were the same as in web, we went pretty far in terms of trying to align those things, making sure that they are named consistently, they behave the same, they have the same options across web, iOS, Android. Yeah.
So those were fully unique code bases. There was nothing shared. Were they sharing tokens?
I guess like they had a design token layer, which had some shared stuff, but there was, apart from that, nothing shared between them. Just sort of built by different engineers. Yeah, like engineers within the same kind of, two separate teams, like a mobile team and a web team.
Yeah.
And we needed there was a lot of effort and kind of overhead of like, how do we keep these teams aligned and making sure that, when we're working on a new component, we have a representative from web and iOS and Android. Yeah. And, some really interesting things come up. Like when you put a web and an iOS and an Android engineer together in a room and say, hey, Bill, how do you build this thing? And web and Android go, oh yeah, that's really straightforward for us, and actually it's actually pretty similar. But then iOS is like, oh no, that's completely different for us. And really interesting to sort of have those conversations and just see those three different disciplines kind of interact with each other.
Yeah. So the question to Sean and Joanna, who have dealt with this, how have you managed parity across all of those platforms? Like, what's that process? Is there any automation? Is it all manual?
Yeah, I was just typing this. Like, we have been able to share some style work across the two frameworks, which has been helpful. So we go React first and then into Angular. And, we don't have to start from scratch on the API or the style work. So that's like a little bit more efficient for Angular. And like Sean, we try to have same like names of props or, what they are in Angular. But I have to kind of track like parity of components and features across the two. And just given our resources, we're usually like 4 to 6 months behind in Angular versus React. But we also have a lot less Angular users, so I can fudge the priority of items based on the user request. So, I might move like one component up to the top of the list, even though it came later than the other one, that kind of thing.
Nice. Any other thoughts, Sean? Or
how do we maintain parity? I guess like there's a token layer for sort of foundational things that was automated for us. A lot of algorithmically generated outputs that fed into iOS, Android, and web, and Figma. We used to treat Figma as if it was a separate platform. So the design system supported 4 platforms: web, iOS, Android, and Figma. I think that framing kind of really helped us to just treat it as another platform alongside the kind of code outputs. But then, kind of manually, really, for us, keeping things in sync, having conversations around sort of APIs and how do we name things. We were not too dogmatic with it. There was cases where like a platform-specific convention, or like the way something is named on iOS, it didn't make sense for us to reinvent that and try and apply a different name. So, because, for example, our sort of generic text component, it's called a label on iOS. So everywhere else is called text. For iOS, it was called label, just because we didn't want to override that platform convention.
Nice. Hannah, did you, before you all chose to sort of go with the web component Stencil solution, were you evaluating whether you should maintain 2 separate libraries?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like my thoughts personally because it was pretty much the first thing I started looking at when I started at Intapp, I was just like, why would we do anything other than React? Like that's just what we should be doing. But I think I very quickly changed my mind on that, to be honest, because we are so constrained by the fact that there are just the three of us on the code side of things. And how can we do anything at all if we're having to maintain multiple libraries? And, the kind of the native question, I don't want to say it keeps me up at night, but it has kept me up some nights, like trying to figure out like how do we actually do that? Because we haven't tackled that yet. We have a mobile team and we can't use our existing setup to provide a package for them. It wouldn't work. So, there's something that we need to try and figure out at some point. So like, how can we do that without falling into the trap of then having to have a whole other package to maintain that's going to be out of date, that we don't have the resources to kind of keep up to date or maintain alongside everything else that we're already doing. It is complicated. And if you don't have a whole dedicated team to do that, then it suddenly becomes a lot of work on top of what you're already doing.
Yeah. I think that is smart, right? To use sort of the team size as a constraint for like some of the choices that you're making. But of course, like I think Joanna was talking about how some of the features that you can get by working in these platforms natively, as opposed to, through some other wrapper approach or whatever, can feel limiting to the consuming team. So yeah, we'll have to have you back once you solve the iOS and Android problem, Hannah. Any other thoughts, folks? Or is there another conversation from the data we want to dive into? I've got one other question here. Actually, Joanna, this is also you. Thanks for answering so thoroughly. You had this idea of making APIs more flexible rather than less. And that allows for future features and scenarios. So I just thought I would toss it out to the attendees to see, is that something that you think about as a characteristic of a more sustainable system infrastructure, is like flexibility in the API, or not? I'm just curious to hear how folks have approached that. So jump right in if you've got thoughts. And Hannah, do you want to start us on that?
I think it probably, there's a balance, right? Like there's a tipping point where things could be too flexible, and if something kind of could be anything, then it also then doesn't necessarily solve the right problems and gets way too complicated. So yeah, but then obviously, flexibility is inherently useful when we're trying to do what we're trying to do. Yeah, I think, but then, how do you find that balance? How do you draw the line?
Yeah. Joanna, jump in.
Yeah. Well, I work at a large enterprise company as well. And when we first started the design system, we baked in a lot of stuff like specific spacing. And just like we had this idea that we were building for our customers, and we had ideas about like the spacing required for that. And now that was started in 2018. Now here we are, and we're working on like internal facing tools for power users who are in the tool every day. And like the spacing requirements are entirely different. And so we're having to go back and kind of like remove some of those built-in decisions to allow the components to be used in more scenarios. But that's like breaking changes, and it's painful. So looking back, I think we kind of had to be specific the way you're saying, Hannah, because like otherwise it wouldn't have been a design system. It would have just been like, do whatever you want. But we're finding that the specificity in some cases has been limiting.
Yeah, super helpful to hear. I've one of my clients is dealing with this exact thing around internal versus external apps, and sort of in very specifically spacing differences. So that's, I think, a challenge a lot of companies are facing right now. Mike, what's up?
Yeah, I actually don't have. Hannah and Joanna kind of already alluded to it, right? But it's something I've noticed in, I don't know, I guess some of the sort of design system authors out there, folks like Nathan Curtis and Dan Mullen. I see a lot of this discussion of, make it flexible. And I struggle with that because I think like then at what point does it cease to become a design system if everything is completely flexible? And so it's just an interesting thought. And that's definitely the common trope on our team, right? Is when we're building new components, right? Is finding that balance between flexibility and control and rigidity aren't the right words, right? But maintaining a sense of the brand and the design consistency and stuff. So we have recently, to kind of what Joanna was speaking to, right? Like, our first set of designs were things like, I work for a bank, so things like, forms for signing up for credit cards and checking accounts, right? But as we grow and get more and more adoption, things like dashboards, right? Dashboards don't need this generous spacing and white space, that forms might have. So we're running into the same thing. So we recently added flexibility around things like padding within components, border radius, things like that, to allow for different types of applications to obviously stay consistent within the application, but maybe have some flexibility around some of those design elements.
Yeah. Well, folks, we're right at the end of our time. Bumpus, I'm so sorry, buddy, but drop a comment in the chat for us because we'd love to hear what you have to say. Just a minute left to give you a couple quick announcements here. First of all, Hannah, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for kind of bringing a more engineering-focused conversation to the community. We need more of this. So thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom and your time. Appreciate that.
Thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And then a couple announcements. All the podcasts and YouTube shows from our last episode are out, so you can get those here. Murphy Truman just released this really cool set of Claude Code skills, a skill pack for Claude. If you're doing systems work, check this thing out. It's loaded. Lots of other good articles and things here. And then one of the folks in Redwoods is Kevin, and he's been doing these crazy experiments around how many colors can the human eye see. So he's looking for more folks to go and test this. So click this link, go run this little test to check your eyesight and see sort of how you stack up against others. Drop things if you've got them in here, folks. Thank you so much for being here. It's so much fun to do this with you every episode, and I really, truly appreciate all of your wisdom and experience. Hannah, you rock. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us on episode 070 of The Question. This format doesn't work unless folks like you are willing to share some of your experience week after week. Remember, you can get access to the raw data, the collaborative FigJam, and all of the recordings for this episode on my website, bencallahan.com. If you or your team could use an outside perspective on your design system program, I'd be honored to support you in that way. There's much more information about my individual and team coaching program over on the website. Thanks for being here, and remember, stay in learning mode.